publishing utilizing CreateSpace and Amazon.com to publish a Franciscan Odyssey. I met the author, Father Lucjan Krolikowski, in 1973 when a former colleague asked me to help him publish his first book, Stolen Childhood, which is still available over the internet. We stayed in contact over the past 40 years, and now I'm very pleased to introduce the translator of Father Lucjan's most recent book, Dr. Gosia Brykczynska. She started her academic career as a humanities graduate with a degree in Russian and Eastern European studies, with a specialty in Soviet medicine. After further studies in medical anthropology and nursing, she pursued work in pediatric oncology nursing. Eventually returning to work in the humanities field, she taught healthcare ethics and obtained her doctorate in pastoral theology and philosophy. Dr. Brykczynska has written several professional books and translated poetry in short pieces from Polish into English. Shortly before retiring, she worked for the European Union with the Royal College of Nursing in the United Kingdom, preparing nursing professionals from Central Europe for admission to single European registration. She is bicultural and bilingual and spends much of her free time in Poland. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Brykczynska.
Privileged to be here. And before I say anything, I think we need to remind ourselves that today is the 11th of November, and here in America you celebrate Veterans Day, and in most of Europe we celebrate Armistice Day, when at 11 o'clock of the 11th month, the 11th hour of the 11th month, arms were ceased. They ceased fighting at the end of World War I. And the significance for Poles is that it's also the National Day of Independence, when they regained their independence after 150 years of being partitioned. So one of the good benefits at the end of World War I is that Poland went back on the maps of Europe. So it's a very auspicious day. And let us remember all those who have fought. We need to be people of peace, not people of war. And I think that's a good message and a good way to start talking about Father Krolikowski's book, because he was a peace-loving Franciscan caught up in the whirlwind of World War II. So what I'd like to do over the next 50 minutes or so is to quickly go over his life for you. Now you're going to get his life accompanied by some photos. Some of them are in the book, most of them are in the book. But obviously the book itself is written from his perspective. It's an autobiography. He is writing the story of his life from his perspective. There I am, having a blessing from Father Lucjan, not literally in this photo, but he was happy with the translation and happy to have the book out, available for people to read. Father Krolikowski was born in 1919 in a part of Poland which at the time was literally on the border with Germany, in a little village not far from Poznań. And his parents, his father was a baker, his mother ran a shop. So a very small town sort of existence. You can imagine him almost being in Hershey, you know. And he had 3 siblings. He had 2 brothers and a sister, and had a very happy, he says himself, idyllic childhood. He was, you know, he was very much loved, very much supported. The kind of childhood that we wish, you know, our children had today. So he always said, I had a happy, you know, contented childhood. One of his uncles, I think his mother's brother, was a friar, was a Franciscan friar in a Franciscan monastery outside of Warsaw. And he was very much in awe of this uncle. And after one of the uncle's visits to his house, he decided he too would like to be a friar. So after a bit of thinking and this, that, and the other, the family agreed for him to go to Warsaw, to this monastery, Niepokalanów, outside of Warsaw, and to join and be a member, I don't know what is a member, but anyway, to be in the junior, so-called junior seminary. And this he did, which is really like high school, but it's a high school with a higher religious content than other high schools. And at the end of that, he was accepted as a novice to the Franciscan friary. The interest for Catholics is that the person who admitted him was Father Maximilian Kolbe, otherwise known as the Saint of Auschwitz, or Oświęcim in Polish. But obviously at the time, this is now you're talking 1935, I think, nobody had any ideas that this is how it would all end. So he was accepted to the order. He writes with a lot of humor and also with a very deep spirituality about his time in the, as a novice, as a postulant, and he writes about his time in the high school with a lot of humor, right sprinkled throughout the book. And eventually, professes his first vows, which were accepted by Maximilian Kolbe. And by 1939, he was in his second year of the seminary. They put him on a tract to be a priest, and he found himself in the town of Lwów, which is Lwów for Polish people, Penn. Now it is the capital of Western Ukraine, and they pronounce it Lviv. So he was sent there to a completely different part of Poland, right on the other end of Poland in relationship to where he was born. So where he was born on the German border, and where he went to study theology to be a priest was by the Ukrainian-Russian border. Even though at the time it was Polish, but it was still by the border. And unfortunately, as we know, come 1st of September 1939, war broke out. And whereas most of us remember war, the German activities of war, Germany what was it, at dawn on the 1st of September, the planes started bombarding, Poland. What we forget is that 2 weeks later, on the 17th of September, the Russians invaded Poland from the other side. So that was not nice. And the people of Poland were caught between the Germans on one side and the Russians on the other side. Oh dear, not very. And Father Lucjan found himself living under Soviet occupation. Because the Soviet forces had moved into that part of Poland, which is just by the border. After a year or so, I think it was in 1940, between 1940 and 1941, 3 main deportations of Poles, Belarusians, and some Ukrainians took place. The Soviet soldiers came and deported. Today we use the expression ethnic cleansing. They just came and deported people basically into Siberia, into Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and places like that. They estimate something like 1.5 million, possibly, Poles deported that way, in cattle wagons in the middle of the night. He got caught up in all of that. He got caught up because he was a cleric. Specifically, they targeted people like that. They approached regular families, a lot of regular, normal people living their daily lives were taken, but also anybody that had any kind of status, and a lot of clergy were taken. So next thing he knows, he's up by the Arctic Circle as a lumberjack. And that is a very, very interesting episode in his life. He writes about it with a lot of beauty. The Polish version of the book is very poetic. He actually is quite lyrical about the forest, about nature. And I think for a Franciscan, you can almost see it. He loves the nature of the taiga and Siberia, but he says it was no fun living there. Two separate issues. So again, some very interesting passages in that part of the book. As you might know, by 1942, the Polish army in exile in London was corresponding with Stalin around the possibility of setting up a Polish army in the Soviet Union. Well, obviously that came about because whereas at the beginning of the war there was a German-Soviet pact, by 1942 they'd fallen out, and now all of a sudden the Soviet Union was an ally in the war effort. So Stalin, we don't know with how much glee, but in any event, agreed to set up a free army of Poles in Russia, in the south of Russia, in fact. So this so-called amnesty occurred, and the prisoners were told, you can now either go back to Poland or join, the men especially could join this new army that was being formed. I should also just mention that there were two categories of people in Siberia, Poles. There were those family people that were simply sent out to labor camps, okay, somewhere out to Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan. And there, some of those families obviously had their menfolk, and those men, together with their families, tried to join the new Polish army in Buzurg. The other category were POWs who found themselves in Soviet POW camps. They too tried to go and join the new army in the south of Russia. And you may or may not know that probably upwards of 40,000 Polish officers never did come back from the POW camps because they were murdered, which is another chapter in another book. But Father Lucjan Krolikowski, he did manage to get down to the south of Russia to the forming army. He writes with a lot, again, with a lot of insight and a lot of color, and it's a very humorous book in parts, for all its tragedy and all the deep issues it's mentioning about his army life. The saddest bits of the book are actually to do with the children that the army encountered and the children that were in Siberia at that time. The army knew that they had to get really out of Siberia, the faster the better. It was not at all clear to the soldiers that the children were coming either with their parents to the outskirts. They were the hangers-on of the army. It's actually a very medieval thought, because that's exactly what used to happen in the Middle Ages. But they thought the safest place to be is by the Polish army. Other children were sent with somebody. The parents would say, I can't get there, I'm too ill, but you take your little sister, you've got to get to the Polish army, they've got to